A hard fall is always jarring. When it happens to one of the most combative, beloved, and outspoken players in the league, it becomes something more, an inflection point, a referendum, a mirror held up to the sport itself. Sophie Cunningham's injury, an ugly collision that left the Phoenix Mercury guard on the floor and then on the sideline, has triggered precisely that kind of moment for the WNBA. The play itself was brief. The reaction has been anything but. Within minutes, clips of the sequence flooded social media, slowed down frame by frame. Fans demanded answers. Former players weighed in. Analysts argued about intent. And soon, the conversation had swelled beyond a single incident to take in larger, more combustible questions. Players' safety, officiating standards, the economics of a star-driven league, and whether the sport has inadvertently created a perception problem, protecting one's storyline at the expense of the rest. To understand why Cunningham's fall struck such a nerve, you have to understand who she is inside this league. The Mercury guard, tough, clever, unapologetically physical, occupies a rare lane in modern professional basketball. She is the agitator teammates love and opponents respect. The veteran who absorbs contact without complaint and gives it back without theatrics. On a roster that has cycled through injuries and reinventions, she has been both tone setter and enforcer, stepping into collisions so that Phoenix's stars don't have to. To Mercury fans, she is not just a rotational guard. She is an identity. That is why the image of her limping to the locker room with a swollen eye and a stiff gait felt symbolic. It is not just that the Mercury lose a starter when Sophie sits. They lose a voice that challenges opponents and referees to hold a line on fairness. And because of the timing and the optics, her absence has become something more than an injury to one player. It has become a catalyst for a broader debate at a time when the WNBA is both surging and under scrutiny. The league's rise this season is undeniable. Attendance is up across markets. Ratings have broken records. Road games for the Indiana Fever have turned into nightly events. Merchandise disappears from shelves. Digital engagement spikes. There is no mystery about the central driver of this momentum. Caitlin Clark has pulled the sport into the mainstream with scoring, flair, and a charisma that plays as well on TikTok as it does on a Tuesday night in a mid-market building. The rookie's effect has been obvious and extensive. More eyeballs, more news cycles, more money. That is good for everyone. But the gravitational pull of a star creates new pressures. The WNBA has never had to calibrate the balance between protecting a once-in-a-generation ratings magnet and maintaining the perception and reality of a level playing field at this scale. When one player dominates not just highlights but conversation, every whistle in her games becomes a talking point. When that player's team, the Indiana Fever, sits at the center of the schedule and the marketing plan, every collision involving a rival draws suspicion. And when a visible critic of the league's new center of gravity gets hurt, the reaction is not just sympathy, it is suspicion. That is the context into which Cunningham's fall arrived. Within an hour, hashtags trended. Justice for Sophie ran alongside Fever Agenda, a shorthand many fans use, fairly or not, to describe what they see as an officiating bias in games involving the Fever and Clark. One viral post asked, "How many more players need to get hurt before the league admits it's rigging things for one star?" Others argued the opposite, chalking the incident up to randomness in a physical game and warning against shaping a story around one play. The volume of a reaction mattered less than its tone. It hinted at something leagues dread, a credibility issue in the eyes of both paying customers and colleagues inside the locker room. Let's separate fact from heat before the conversation loses its footing. First, injuries are an unfortunate constant in professional basketball. They happen in chaotic spaces to players of every style and status. The WNBA schedule is grueling. Most veterans are managing 24 nicks and strains by midseason. Cunningham's black eye and limp were dramatic and public. Many other collisions aren't. One injury doesn't prove an agenda. Second, officiating is hard in a league that has embraced pace, spacing, and physicality. Off-ball contact has crept into the game the way it has in the NBA over the past decade. Small bumps at the line of a cut, grabs on the hip to disrupt rhythm, hard screens that live somewhere between legal and unnecessary. Referees are tasked with sorting flow from force. On television, slow motion replay can make a routine bump look malicious. in real time. It's a judgment call at full speed from an imperfect angle. Third, and equally true, perception matters. Fans are not wrong to call for consistent standards from crew to crew and quarter to quarter. Players are not wrong to argue that freedom of movement has eroded in ways that reward grabbing and holding as a defensive strategy. Coaches on both sides in most physical games will tell you that once a particular tone is set, warned against in the first quarter, ignored in the second, overcorrected late, it is almost impossible to get a fair rhythm back. The league's job is not to make everyone happy. It is to create a standard that players can trust and demonstrably enforce it. That brings us back to the fault line under this latest storm. The Indiana Fever agenda that animates so much of the online reaction to Cunningham's injury. It's a phrase that has some explanatory power and a lot of emotional power. The Fever draw huge audiences. Clark is a magnet for coverage. In some games, both she and her teammates have looked like they benefited from tightly called contact at the point of screens or on long closeouts. In others, Clark has taken hard fouls and gotten little relief. Fans will interpret those nights through the lens they carry in. If you believe the league is favoring the Fever to protect his investment, every call against a Phoenix guard will look like proof. If you believe Clark is targeted nightly because of her fame, every whistle she doesn't get will look like negligence. The truth is messier and less conspiratorial. Referee assignments come from a rotation designed to avoid needless controversy. Crew chiefs file reports. The league office reviews calls. There are fines and quiet demotions for poor performance. Much of this happens off camera, which makes the system feel opaque at a moment when transparency would do more than statements to calm the waters. In that sense, Cunningham's injury is a real opportunity for the WNBA to demonstrate how it makes decisions on players' safety and officiating emphasis. What happens post-game when there's a collision, how flagrant fouls are evaluated, what the communication pathways look like between teams and the league. When a team feels standards have slipped, Sophie Cunningham's role in this is not peripheral. She has been unafraid to speak her mind about fairness. She has pushed back on the idea that certain players are untouchable. She has defended teammates and made a point, on the floor and off, of refusing to become a prop in someone else's highlight package. Remove that presence, and you remove a certain resistance. It is not a stretch to say that the WNBA needs players like Sophie precisely because the sport thrives on honest competition, visible edges, and the friction that makes rivalries more than polite calendar items. It should also be said, the league's breakout star is not a villain in this movie. Caitlin Clark has taken her beating as she has given it, and on most nights she has done so without the performative theater that turns hard fouls into internet fuel. Her presence has made life more difficult for every team in the WNBA, not because of whistles, but because she changes geometry. Two defenders pick her up at 30 feet, lanes open for teammates, runouts happen sooner, games stretch. Part of the job of being the face of the league is absorbing frustration directed at the institution. Clark is doing that role of service if she keeps responding the way she has, with a wry nod, a hard screw of her own, and the next pass the corner. There is, however, a limit to how much pressure any league can place on a single player as it grows. If every marketing plan and broadcast lead is anchored to one team's arc, you risk two kinds of fatigue. Fan boredom when that team slides and locker room resentment everywhere else. The NBA learned this lesson a decade ago when it tried to serialize rivalries to the point of exhaustion. What works in college, where turnover is built into the sport, has a shorter shelf life in the pros. The WNBA has an opportunity right now to diversify how it tells its own story without reducing promotional support around its brightest star. That means leaning into other franchises' personalities, Chicago's swagger, Las Vegas's ruthlessness, Minnesota's no-drama professionalism, as well as continuing to tell Indiana's. What about the Phoenix Mercury? They are not just a market, but a marquee, headlined by Diana Taurasi's singular presence and bolstered by a fan base that travels and demands. Cunningham's absence hurts on court and in the room. She takes assignments that free up scorers. She baits opponents into energy-sapping reactions. She is a connective tissue that keeps runs from turning into surrenders. The Mercury are a different team without her, and the timing matters as a jockey for playoff positioning in a Western Conference that offers very little margin for error. From a policy perspective, The WNBA and its officiating leadership could use this moment to demonstrate commitment to fairness in 3 practical ways. First, increase transparency. The NBA's last 2-minute reports are not perfect, but they give fans a sense that the league is willing to review itself in public. Even a simplified version. Crew explanations on pool reports, weekly officiating points of emphasis shared with the media would help. Second, address freedom of movement directly. If the league is concerned about overly physical off-ball contact, say so and set the tone early in games with clear warnings and balanced enforcement. Third, reiterate players' safety protocols in visible language. Fans need to know what happens after significant contact beyond play resumes. What is the concussion evaluation process? How do crews determine flagrant fouls versus common? The more the league can take the mystery out of those steps, the less space there is for conspiracy. The players, for their part, will talk. They always do. Publicly, you will hear the usual phrases. Respect the game. Next woman up. Control what we can control. Under that layer, you will hear something else. Concern about a sport that is still deciding how to handle its own growth spurt. That's normal. Big leaps are noisy. The important thing is whether those inside the league, front office, referees, coaches, veterans, choose to push the conversation toward solutions rather than toward grudge maintenance. Sophie Cunningham will be part of that conversation as soon as she can be. Her teammates will tell you she does not know how to disengage. Rehab for a player built like her is not just about the joint or the muscle. It's about restoring the edge that makes her useful to her team and a nuisance to everyone else. Fans should hope she returns sooner than later, not because Phoenix needs wins, they do, but because Sophie's presence makes the league more honest. A sport that finds room for stars and enforcers in the same frame is a sport that can thrive. It is worth widening the lens to include the fever themselves. Indiana is not an invention. They were a punchline 2 years ago, a problem now. That is not marketing. That is team building. Lexi Hull treats 50 to 50 balls like personal affronts. Aaliyah Boston has grown into one of the savviest posts in the league before her 3rd training camp. Kelsey Mitchell has turned late-game possessions into a personal specialty after years of heavy lifting. Caitlin Clark's arrival did not create those realities. It weaponized them. When fans accuse the WNBA of protecting Indiana, they are too often stepping over the obvious. Indiana has earned many of the bounces it is getting simply by being good enough to demand them.